Okay, the wise shall understand the study of Daniel. We're in lesson 18. We're a little over halfway through the study of Daniel. We're still in chapter 7 of Daniel. So there's a lot in chapter 7, so we're taking a little bit more time in there. So hope that you will learn something by staying there so long. And actually, chapter 7 kind of covers a lot of the stuff. Actually, Daniel progresses, in its explanations of this end-time scenario, the new world order that's coming on the earth, and it starts off, explains the nations and what have you, and then it builds on that. And so as you move through it, you're building on this original concept. The concept actually comes out of Daniel chapter 2, and then we build on that, and we see a progression of the ideas as we go through there. And of course, I've told you before that Revelation is essential when you're studying Daniel and vice versa. So the study of Daniel, lesson 8, the rise of the little horn, is the topic of today's lesson. And it's in Daniel chapter 7, and we're going to look in particularly verses 13 to 24. And we'll finish up in Daniel chapter 7 next week. So let's do a little bit of review. Daniel 7, verses 9 to 12, so we can catch up where we're at. And so we'll look at the throne room. And so we're going to review that. We went over that in detail. I won't give you as much detail this time as I did before. So in the last lesson, we saw the four great beasts depicted in Daniel 7, verses 3 to 8. Now, in Daniel 7, verses 9 and 10, Daniel witnesses the scene in heaven at the time of the final judgment on the nations before the millennial kingdom. So Daniel chapter 7 kind of moved ahead in the whole history of the end-time scenario, and they introduced judgment at this point. But as we keep moving on in Daniel, we will kind of backtrack a little bit and see the progression of events as I described earlier. So the Ancient of Days mentioned in the verses we're about to read is God the Father. So keep that in mind. Then in Daniel 7, verses 11 to 12, the little horn with his Gentile kingdom is destroyed. And so you see that Daniel in chapter 7 is introducing the Antichrist, and he's telling you ahead of time that the Antichrist is not going to win, and that there will be a reign of Jesus Christ in the last days. It would last for 1,000 years, as we find out in Revelation chapter 20. So in Daniel chapter 7, verse 9, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. So I said the Ancient of Days is God the Father, and we're going to see something going on here when, as we move through here, where the one like the Son of Man is coming before the throne of God to receive something, and that something will be the lost dominion that was lost to Satan by Adam in the garden in Genesis chapter 3. So in verse 10, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. And verse 11, I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed, and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time. So in this lesson, we will now see the interpretation of these four beasts that we saw in Daniel 7, verses 3 to 8. But first we will examine the meaning of the everlasting dominion seen in verses 13 and 14. So we, just to review a little bit in verse 12, these beasts that were presented, the four beasts, they represented kingdoms. And in verse 12, it's saying that they were judged and they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were yet prolonged for a season and time. So the Son of Man, Daniel 7:13 says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. So who do you think the Son of Man is? Jesus Christ is the Son of Man. He described himself as the Son of Man in the Gospels when he was on earth. And that would, anybody that understood the Scriptures and was listening to that would hearken back to this type of verse in Daniel. And they would have to then realize what Jesus was saying, that he was proclaiming himself to be a deity, and clouds of heaven, clouds kind of describe deity. This is I'll get into this in a minute. But anyway, in verse 14, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So we saw that earlier when we were in chapter 2. We saw that there was a rock that was cut not with human hands that struck the image on the feet of it, and it destroyed the whole image. And so, and it represented a kingdom, and we're going to see that in a minute. So in verse 13, we see one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days. Now notice what Jesus told the high priest in Matthew chapter 26, verses 63 to 65, that described himself as this Son of Man of Daniel 7:13. So Matthew 26, and starting in verse 63, but Jesus held his peace, and the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. So what does Jesus say? So Jesus saith unto him in, this is verse 64, he says, Thou hast said, nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. And then notice what the high priest said, because the high priest understood Jesus perfectly, that Jesus was referring to himself as deity. In verse 65, when it says, Then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, He hath spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. Now the only reason that the high priest would refer to blasphemy was because Jesus was making himself out to be deity, God himself. So Jesus called himself the Son of Man, and this response referred the high priest back to Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14. Now the high priest believed that Jesus blasphemed because clouds are garments of deity. Clouds are garments of deity. So it is possible that Jesus ascended out of sight of the disciples. Acts chapter 1, verses 9 to 11, he was brought near the Ancient of Days and given his dominion and glory and a kingdom which shall not pass away, as described by Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14. So you may be seeing, when he ascended in Acts chapter 1, you may be seeing this scene being played out in heaven as Jesus is now coming to claim the dominion that he has just won by dying on the cross. He defeated Satan on the cross. Now Satan is still running around as if he's controlling everything, and for a lot of people, he is in charge of them. The thing of it is that we as Christians need to focus on who we are in Jesus Christ, what Jesus Christ has done, and keep our allegiance where it belongs, to Jesus Christ, not to the Luciferian kingdom which is on the earth right now. But God is sovereign and he's in charge. So the kingdom he receives is the fifth kingdom, and now don't forget, we had the four beasts. We had four different kingdoms, four different empires, I should say, and Jesus Christ, the kingdom that Jesus Christ received then would be the fifth kingdom, and is everlasting and begins with the millennial kingdom for the first 1,000 years and then continues eternally on the new eternal earth. And you get to see that more clearly if you were to read from Revelation chapter 20 through the end of Revelation. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and the millennium are the various kingdoms which are described in the book of Daniel as succeeding kingdoms. Won't say that they are the only kingdoms of the world, but they're the ones that prophetically are referred to as world kingdoms in the time of time of Israel, and they affected greatly Israel because Babylon, of course, attacked Israel, took them into captivity. Medo-Persia then defeated Babylon, and Greece then defeated the Medo-Persia, and then Rome finally took over, and Jesus Christ will take over from where Rome is left off. And as I've said before, Rome never completely disappeared. It is with us today, and when Jesus Christ returns again, he will set up his millennial kingdom, which is the promised kingdom of Israel. That is what Israel was waiting for from the beginning. And so this is not a Christian millennium. It is the kingdom promised to the Jewish people, although there will be Christians ruling and reigning with Jesus Christ in the millennial kingdom. Now, this part of the dream refers to the stone that became a great mountain and filled the whole earth in the dream of Daniel in chapter 2, which we've already covered in previous lessons. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 34, it says, "Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer thrashing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth." And verse 44, "And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." So the kingdom of Jesus Christ, ruling and reigning, which is the promised kingdom of Israel, of the Jews, will take place, defeat all the others, and rule and reign forever. In verse 45, "For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure." Now this is the kingdom of which the Jews were expecting when Christ came the first time. Remember in Acts chapter 1, the disciples asked Jesus specifically, are you at this time going to bring in the kingdom? And he said, it's not for you to know the time or the season, only the Father knows. But one thing he did not tell his disciples was that what they said was wrong. Therefore, the kingdom was still future, this kingdom. So the kingdom was offered and rejected at the time Jesus was first on the earth. And the dominion he receives is everlasting and is that which passed from Adam to Satan at Adam's fall. It has now been regained at Christ, the victory over Satan on the cross. And because of that, we are saved by his blood on that cross 2,000 years ago. It only remains for Jesus to return and reign in his millennial kingdom to complete God's plan of redemption. And he will deal with the Jews. Remember, I've told you before, purpose of the tribulation is for the salvation of the Jewish nation. Now, clouds may be interpreted as superhuman majesty and state, and we said it's clothing for deity. Clouds are clothing for deity. So when Jesus said he was coming on the clouds, he was referring to himself as deity, and that's why the high priest and the Pharisees and what have you wanted to stone him and accused him of blasphemy. Now notice these references to clouds associated with the presence of deity. We see evidence for this of what I've told you, so I don't make this stuff up out of whole cloth. Sometimes I'm tempted, but I resist. So Exodus chapter 13, verse 21. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them away, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. So the Lord went before Israel in this pillar of cloud by night or by day. So in Matthew chapter 17 and verse 1, and after 6 days Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And in verse 5, while he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. In Acts chapter 1, verse 4, it says, And being assembled together with them, commanded them that they should not depart from Jerusalem, but wait for the promise of the Father, which saith he, Ye have heard of me. In verse 9, And when he had spoken these things, while they beheld, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. So, no question, these verses refer to deity and another evidence for the deity of Jesus Christ. So Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14 are a condensation of the book of Revelation from Revelation chapter 5 through chapter 22. And the everlasting dominion and kingdom succeeds and is superior to the preceding four world beast kingdoms. We know one thing: we always get it wrong, and God always gets it right. And so the everlasting kingdom will be righteous rule like we've never seen in our entire life, nor has the world ever seen before. So the interpretation of the dream. Remember, it all started off with a vision of these four beasts. So we're going to take a look at the interpretation of this dream. We've done some of the interpretation as we've gone through, but here is the point in Daniel chapter 7, verse 5, starting there, where it gets more specific. Daniel was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of the things. These great beasts, which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth. Now there they are. We've seen them before individually. There they are together, the beasts that arise out of the earth. So now realizing that the days of the Gentile kingdoms would be prolonged was disturbing to Daniel. Daniel did not want to entertain the thought that these kingdoms would go on for a long time, and Daniel probably would die before he'd ever see the promise of the reign of Jesus Christ, a millennial kingdom. And so what was even more disturbing was the viciousness of the succeeding empires, especially the cruelty indicated of the fourth kingdom. But this is what we've seen in all of our history. And we see this today. The cruelty of the world systems against the people of God in particular. Notice that Daniel recognizes the threefold nature of man in spirit, soul, and body. And we saw that in verse 15, where it said in verse 15, Daniel was grieved in my spirit, in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head. So threefold, the visions of his head had to do with his mental capacity, his body, and of course his spirit, the threefold nature of man. And he mentions his spirit and body and then speaks of the soul or mind when he refers to the visions of his head. So in chapter 2, Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, notice this, that Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Here we find Daniel's dream interpreted by an angel. There's a difference, and I'll explain that in a minute. Chapter 2 shows world history from a pagan king's viewpoint, the accomplishments of humanity and humanism. So here in this chapter, though, we are shown world history from God's viewpoint, exposing man's moral character. So there's a difference, a subtle difference between chapter 2 and chapter 7 in this regard. So in chapter 7 parallels the book of Revelation in that, like John, Daniel is helped to understand by the angels. Now notice the short work that the angel made of the explanation of the four kingdoms as if they were of no importance. Kings in Daniel means kingdoms, a succession of kingdoms, or individual kings depending upon the context. And there's a deeper meaning yet, which we will yet go over. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 18, but the saints of the Most High shall take or receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Now there's a succession of four kingdoms before the fifth, which is the Messianic kingdom. So these four kingdoms, the Messianic kingdom is possessed by the saints of God, and that there will be four kingdoms before that happens. And we've seen this, and we're going through one right now. Rome has never disappeared from the face of the earth, and I'll show you that in a minute. The angel was more interested in this fact. The point of this verse is that none of the four beasts would receive God's kingdom. None of the four beasts would receive God's kingdom. So the saints of the Most High may be those who govern during the millennial kingdom. They will arrive with Christ when he comes to reign. Chapter 19 of Revelation. The word translated take in the KJV is better understood as receive. They will receive the kingdom, not bring it or establish it. So it's not something that the saints of God will grab or take. Jesus Christ does it all. And so the saints will receive the kingdom when they after the second coming of Jesus Christ. So it is God who will establish this kingdom. The people living on the earth when Christ comes will not be these saints of the Most High. They will be governed principally the Jewish remnant believers that will occupy the millennium. Again, purpose of the tribulation is to deal with the Jewish nation. The millennial kingdom is the kingdom that was promised Israel. This is very important, understanding this, because the church today much of the church today has got it wrong in their replacement theology, thinking that the church has replaced Israel and that all of the promises promised Israel is now the promises to the church. And so they spiritualize much of the Bible, and they do this to I believe, the detriment of the body of Christ. And so it is necessary to fulfill all the promises, eternal covenants of God to Israel. And if you go back and do a study on God's promises, they were unconditional in terms of the land. It didn't say that they would always be the tenants, but but God would always bring them back to it. Okay? And I believe that Ezekiel chapters 36 and 37 have been fulfilled within the 20th century. Israel is back in the land. Israel is back in the land in unbelief. And that is why that during the tribulation period, God will deal with their belief. And then the remnant will be saved. So the Jewish remnant is to occupy the kingdom of promise, which Christ, as the ruler of his bride or church. All the saved of Israel and of the Gentiles that still remain alive in the end of the tribulation will enter the millennial kingdom to be ruled by Christ and the resurrected saints. That this is an everlasting kingdom can be seen in the state following the millennium as described by Revelation chapter 22. And Revelation 22, verse 3, and there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him, and they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads, and there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. So the millennial kingdom will actually turn into the eternal kingdom. At the end of 1,000 years, there'll be one more rebellion. Satan will rebel, but he will be put down immediately. And then there will be the white throne judgment of the unsaved. And then the kingdom will be eternal. There'll be new heavens and new earth and an eternal kingdom. So the kingdom of God is more than the earth, although for the first 1,000 years it will focus on the earth. And Satan, of course, is bound 1,000 years, and during that time, man will have no excuse saying that Satan made me do it, because he won't be around to give you that excuse. So sin is up to you, as it is today. Really, sin is up to you. Whether you sin or not, it's up to you. So you have no excuse, even today. So it becomes eternal when Satan is finally disposed of at the end of the millennium, and the resurrected Old and New Testament saints rule from the holy city. Now, Daniel chapter 7, verse 19. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were as of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet, and the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. I beheld, And the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until, verse 22, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given. Whoops. What happened? Okay, and verse 22, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. So you can see, depicted in the pictures that's on the screen there, you can see the beast with the 10 horns, and you'll notice that there's that other horn that came up, making himself the 11, but he displaces 3 horns, and he becomes himself the 8th. But this is all kind of complicated in its explanation, but it's logical. And we'll try to explain it as best we can in that regards as we go through this. But he is the Antichrist, and he is displacing 3 kings and making himself, out of the remaining 7, the 8th. So this little horn is a man, a dictator, who will have a country. He will begin small, as seen by the horn being little but become powerful. Now this country could possibly be Chaldea or southern Iraq, because Habakkuk refers to the Chaldeans in the same context as the Antichrist or little horn. A problem with this interpretation is that the Antichrist is mentioned as being of the people or Romans who destroyed Jerusalem in 70 A.D., and that's found in Daniel 9, verse 26. So, and we'll find, and we'll go through this as we go through this, we'll find that each prophet has his own name for the Antichrist. Actually, the Antichrist is mentioned by John the Apostle as a particular name and or description of the evil man that will come, but other people, other prophets refer to him as something else. So we'll see that as we go along. So there's a picture of Antichrist and Satan. You see how closely they're working together. The Antichrist will be embodied by Satan at some point. So Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 6, for lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. As I was reading these verses in preparing for this lesson, I was thinking of what ISIS is doing today. That's pretty much in the same area, if you get my understanding here. So in verse 10, and they shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. Now in verse 11, notice the change of the pronoun. Verse 11, then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing or ascribing this his power unto his God. So he begins talking about they in the plural, and then in verse 11 he personalizes this Antichrist, and you have the personal pronouns starting to show up. So shall his mind change, and his power, and talking about his God. So after mentioning the Chaldeans, note how Habakkuk personifies them as the Antichrist in verses 10 and 11 by a change from a plural to a singular pronoun. Note that the beast or Antichrist of Revelation 13:4 received his power from the dragon or Satan. And this is a clear description of the Antichrist. Now the total reign of the Antichrist is more than 7 years, since he was in power before he could confirm a covenant for 7 years. So he confirms a covenant which starts the 7-year tribulation period. So therefore the Antichrist is in place. He may not be totally recognized yet, but he will be in power or he'll wield some power for more than 7 years. So, but he at some point will confirm a covenant. And we keep looking for the confirmation of that covenant as we see what is happening in the Middle East. And it always seems to break down at the last minute. But this thing is coming, and the world is ready for this, what is happening here. So Revelation 13, verse 4, and they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months, which is 3.5 years. Now notice that that in Revelation chapter 13, they're talking about the beast which came up out of the sea. The beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns. And but then even here, it slips into a personal pronoun, indicating that there is a person involved in all of this, the leader. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, and he, the Antichrist, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, or 7, or a 7. And if you actually do a study on the word 7 and the use of the word 7 in these verses, and you'll find that the logic of it is amazing to represent years. It's not weeks, it's years. Represents weeks of years. So the 42 months is the length of time that Antichrist persecutes the saints or tribulation saints. Revelation 13, verse 7, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. This refers to God setting up his millennial kingdom and the transfer of dominion from Satan to the saints. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2, do ye not know that the saints shall judge the world? Did you know that? And if the world shall be judged by you, are ye unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Think about that. In Daniel 7, verse 19, we saw that Daniel himself was more concerned with the 4 beasts, particularly the 4th. I would think that would be right, because it was a very terrible appearing beast. It had no counterpart that Daniel would recognize on the earth. It was a terrifying beast. He appealed to the angel for details. Now take a look at that beast. I mean, you can see that it's just a terrifying beast. It doesn't represent a lion or a tiger or anything else. It's just a horrifying, terrifying beast. It would bring terror in the world, wouldn't it? Daniel 7, verse 23, thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth. Shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. Has any kingdom devoured the whole earth presently? No. So this is future. This is a prophecy. In verse 24, and the 10 kings out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. Again, we're referring back to this small little horn that shall arise, and 3 kings will be subdued by him. Now, we have already established that Rome and its revived form is represented by the 4th beast. 10 horns came up out of this kingdom. Many believe that the revived Roman Empire will be those nations within the borders of the present European Union. I once thought that was going to be the case, but there's more than 10. Up until the point that there was 10, it seemed logical that's exactly what we would have. But it's gone beyond that. I don't know how many nations are represented in the borders of the European Union, but it's a lot more than 10. But the fact is that the old Roman Empire never really disappeared. This is where we probably have gone off a little bit, but survived in the colonial system that arose out of the splintered nations after the fall of Rome. Now, for example, the British, Dutch, Spain, and Portugal each spread their territories worldwide, and their people settled in these colonies. And it is therefore possible that the revived Roman Empire today exists in the 10 regions of the Club of Rome, still greatly influenced by the European Union and her various powerful colonies, such as the United States of America. And notice this. This is the English octopus. Now, if you watch the 2012 Olympics, at the very end of it, an octopus creeped onto the stage. And everybody was wondering what this octopus is doing there. But notice this old newspaper picture, I think it's a newspaper picture, indicating the octopus of the English Empire. And it's the entire world. You see that? But it's not just the British Empire. It was the Dutch. It was Spain. It was Portugal. It was others that spread their empire from. They all separated into splinter groups from the original Roman Empire and spread their tentacles all over the world. And that is what you're faced with today. And you see that in your 10 regions, the whole earth, Daniel 7, verse 23, the whole earth is covered by the tentacles of a world, a one-world system, you see, and represented by these 10 regions. They're called 10 economic regions but of the world. But today, I believe this is what is referred to is the beginning of the revival of the Roman Empire. Okay? That's my opinion. So the little horn came up among the 10 horns, producing an 11th horn. The little horn is the Antichrist. The little horn is identified with Satan. In Revelation, Satan gives power to the Antichrist, to the beast. Together with the false prophet, another beast, the Antichrist and Satan form an unholy trinity. The little horn will uproot 3 of the 10, leaving 7, and he will take the place of the 3 to become the 8th. Thus there will be 3 stages to the Roman Empire: the beast stage, the 10-horn stage, and finally the Antichrist stage. Revelation 13, verse 4, and they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And verse 11, I beheld another beast coming out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon, and he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. The old Roman Empire, as we've stated before and continue to state, never conquered the whole earth. Daniel 7, verse 23. Old Roman Empire never conquered the whole earth. But this modern version with the 10 regions is the whole earth. Daniel 7:23, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all the kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth. The whole earth is being devoured by all of these agreements we're making and within the regions that have been set out by the Club of Rome in 1973. We got the Trans-Pacific Partnership now, which is bringing together under the same umbrella the Far East. But yet it seems to be isolating China. So, is there going to be a conflict in that area? But China yet seems to have a whole lot of investments in our nation. Okay, so what are we doing? Is it a chess game? I think it's a chess game by the powers that be. And yet, the free trade agreements that's being exercised, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and what have you, are the same agreements that created the European Union back a long time ago. It started off with trade agreements. And the United States, before it merges into the proposed North American Union, before it merges in there, it has set up trade agreements amongst all of these. Canada, Mexico, United States, Central America, what have you. All the trade agreements. And it is causing our corporations to abandon America and flee to other nations where they can get cheap labor. And I believe slavery is alive and well in these third world nations. So no empire has ever accomplished that, even though they tried. They never devoured the whole earth, as we are doing today. The revived Roman Empire would succeed where the others have failed. We are today on the verge of a new world order. I think George H.W. Bush jumped the gun a bit. And Barack Obama is carrying out the new world order today. It is possible that the United Nations is positioned to be the framework of world government once the various places or pieces are arranged. Our leaders speak of global this and global that. We are being prepared to be global citizens. Our school systems are preparing our children to be global citizens. It may be that the United Nations will ultimately give way to another form once the reorganizing efforts of the nations are complete. One thing is sure, we will have world government with the attendant loss of individual national sovereignty. Whether we like it or not, they will do it. They will do it to us. The political, religious, social, and educational establishments are feverishly working towards that end. Do not doubt it. Pay attention to what your children are being taught in their textbooks and by their teachers, because they are going through an indoctrination process in global living. And it's all brought about by a religious idea involving the environment. The final control will be economic. People will do almost anything for food, including accepting a mark in their hand or forehead. Revelation chapter 13, verse 16, and it causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Is there any doubt that this one world system is the goal of our political leaders? Let me quote what a Georgetown University professor, Carol Quigley, President Bill Clinton's mentor, wrote in his History of the World, A Tragedy and Hope. Now, I know that he's the mentor of Bill Clinton because Bill Clinton announced it at his, I think it was his nomination, inauguration, or whatever, for his presidency way back in the 90s, and that he announced that that he believed every word that Professor Quigley wrote in his book Tragedy and Hope. And here are some of what Quigley wrote. He says, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. So, financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political systems of each country, is that what we have today? Quigley goes on to say, this system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. So this is what Bill Clinton agrees with, and I believe this is what all of your leaders today agree with. But they don't tell you this. They do it behind closed doors. The little horn. The little horn is known by various names in Scripture. He's called the Chaldean in Habakkuk chapter 1 verses 6 to 11 and chapter 2 verse 5. He's called the Assyrian in Isaiah chapter 14 verse 25. Note that Chaldea and Assyria are both in the same general area occupied by modern-day Iraq and Syria. And a lot is happening over there. A lot is happening over there. He's also called a king of fierce countenance, Daniel chapter 8, verse 23. He's also called the prince that shall come, Daniel chapter 9, verse 26. He's called a vile person in Daniel chapter 11, verse 21. He's called the willful king in Daniel 11, verse 36. He's the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3. He's that wicked or the lawless one in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8. He's the Antichrist in 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. And he's the beast in Revelation 13, verse 1. We live in the time of a corrupt world system. This is where we're living. We are living in this time. That system will one day be destroyed by the return of Jesus Christ, who will set up his millennial reign. We need to recognize the fruitlessness of building an earthly rather than an everlasting kingdom. You cannot take it with you. So, store treasures where they will not rust. One day soon, all of what we see will disappear from sight and memory, and Christ will wipe away every tear of this present existence. We must set our thoughts on things above and not be bothered by the cares of this vanishing world. This world will vanish. Think about eternity. Don't think about the 70 that you're allotted to in this life. I'm on borrowed time, by the way. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 1. Now I, Paul, myself, beseech you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am base among you, but being absent am bold toward you. But I beseech you that I may not be bold when I am present with that confidence wherewith I think to be bold against some which think of us as if we walked according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and having in a readiness to revenge all disobedience, even when your obedience is fulfilled. Don't think on earthly things. You cannot take it with you. Naked you came, naked you go. It's like the man that put all his possessions up in the attic, think that he was going to grab it on the way up. And his wife said, they're still up there. He went the other way, I guess. So, don't count on it. Count on the heavenly things.